Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we're talking about burnout. What is it? How does it happen? What can you do about it? We're just going to jump into a conversation about it and see what we can unpack.
The sad thing that I see in Christianity is people start something and they never finish.
Yeah.
And they quit, and a lot of people don't know what that's a result of. How does that happen? What is that? And that's the language everybody uses, or the phrasing is, I just got burned out.
Yeah.
What are they really saying? Maybe we'll be able to somewhat define what that really is. I think that burnout is when you lose the fuel and the flame that keeps your fire going. I think that, because everybody has that stage when they walk with God and they begin to work for Him, what they get on fire for Him, right? Isn't that what we say in the church world? Got on fire for God. Or you remember when you got on fire for God? And it doesn't stay that way, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
It doesn't stay that way. And so what is that? And what does the Bible say about it? Galatians 6:9 comes to mind, where Paul said, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And he's talking about, all the seed that's been planted and how there's a harvest waiting on you and you can reap what you've sown. And he says, in due season we can reap, we can harvest all that stuff, whatever God's doing in our life, whatever we've worked on, if we faint not.
Yeah.
And I think that people forget you're going to get tired. You're going to get weary, as Paul says. I've been doing this for 17 years, and there have been so many times when I was tired, I was wore out. I didn't know if I could keep doing it. I wanted to just go be a normal person or a normal church member, or not even go to church anymore.
Yeah. I've been through seasons of, depending on how you look at it, it could be just a season of depression. It could be a season of burnout, something where you lose your drive to do it. I've heard it said before that no one ever does anything that they don't want to do. And so when you get to a point where you just don't want to do it anymore, you've got to have another level of why you're doing it. And if a lot of times that's when it starts getting hard mentally and emotionally to persevere through it, because you don't have a desire. And if you don't have something else holding you into it, a lot of times you don't stay in it.
Yeah, and I think that we underestimate the reality of burnout. Nobody's exempt from it. Like you don't get to a certain level of your spirituality or your walk with God or the amount of Bible that you know, or even for ministry leadership, the amount of people that you've led to Christ, or the amount of sermons you preached, or the amount of classes you've taught, or the amount of growth that you experienced. You're never exempt from burnout. And anybody can get tired. Anybody can get weary. And here's a good example. John 4. The Bible says that Jesus was weary with His journey.
Yeah.
Even the Son of God got tired. And He got weary. Now, obviously, he didn't quit.
Yeah,
he didn't stop. And He had more than ample opportunity to do so, especially within the Garden of Gethsemane and Calvary and the crucifixion. But He continued and He kept going. And I think we forget, as God and as man, Christ even dealt with the effects that lead up to burnout. Just the tiresome, weary, becoming weary and wore out. And I have been there, you've been there.
Yeah.
I'm sure many people watching have been there or are there right now. And maybe just some of the things we can talk about with burnout, maybe encourage somebody that's watching today.
So what gets you there? Like what kind of things put you in a position where you burn out? Like let's say I'm not there right now, or let's say I am there and I'm trying to retrace my steps. Like, how did I wind up here? Like, what are some things that you think can lead to that situation? I think
one thing that's worth talking about before we dive into what really leads to that is related to a conversation you've had before several times. Is the whole idea, and what you and I would say is the myth of balance.
Yes.
in keeping balance, and you've spoke to that several times. Share some of that stuff that you and I talked about with how people look at balance and misbalance. Oh, this is why I burned out.
Yeah.
Well, speak to a little bit of that for a second.
No, this whole concept, what really opened my eyes to it is there's a guy named Frank Beeler. He's a guy in the whole ministry realm, and he actually wrote a book on this whole thing. And if I remember correctly, the title of it is The Myth of Balance. And the whole concept of that book is that this whole idea of balance, like I've got to have my time like equally divided between everything, that's just a made up thing. Like you can't be what you want to be in your head. Like if you have a dream and you really want to achieve it, you can't be that and have all this compartmentalized life. Like, I mean, think about Jesus, all right?
Right.
Jesus had one thing that he did. Like he was here for one purpose, and everything else in his life, the people he spent his time with, how he spent his time with his family, how he conducted himself in public, how he conducted himself in private, all of that was parts of the one thing. And I think when it comes down to the myth of balance, I've seen this time and time again, is people like, oh, well, you know, I'm giving too much time. Like, let's take ministry, for example.
Sure.
Because I know me and you have seen this over and over just, you know, in our work at our church. We see people who, they're like, I'm not, you know, I don't want to take time away from X. You know, sometimes it's, I don't want to spend less time with my family to do stuff at church, which, don't get me wrong, there's a balance you need to have to, I said balance, but there's a, you need to have time with your family. But if you think that your life goal means that you can't spend time with your family, something's off. Like your family should be a part of that. Like your family, how you are with your family should be a part of that, and they should work together. And that's a hard thing to describe, but you know when you're offending that rule. Like you know when you're breaking that rule. I've been plenty guilty of that, where I've been like in the middle of doing something like, man, I hate that I'm having to take time away from, you know, all right, I'm the geek around here, right? So I was the gamer in high school, and I had to give up all of my video gaming because I didn't have time to do it. And it was one of those things like where I got like sour about that at one point, like, because I was into it.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
4, 5, 6 hours a day. I mean, I was into it. And it was one of those things like, I don't get to balance what I do now with this other thing. I'm like, what's wrong with that? Like, is this better?
Is there any balance in making a choice?
No.
There's not. You have a choice. What is most important to me? What is most valuable? First of all, if you're a Christian, be what you are in every aspect of your life. Be a Christian. Be a Christian and have a relationship with God. Put Him first. Be a Christian and be the man or woman you're supposed to be in your marriage. Be a Christian and be a Christian parent to your children. Be a Christian and be an active member of your church. Be a Christian and completely surrender and engage to whatever your calling is. That's not balance. That is just priority. I'm going to be what I am to all these things. And if I put God first and I be what I am to all these things, it's hard to find burnout when you put Him first and do what He said to do.
There's always a trade-off. Like sacrifice requires a trade-off. You don't have sacrifice without giving something up. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like sometimes, like I know there have been times like where me and my wife, like I've had an unexpected meeting come up. Like something that, look, I've got to be here and I know we had plans, but this has to happen. I don't really have a choice in the matter. So what we'll do is we'll make up for that some other way. Like we had plans. If I'm having to change those plans for something, sometimes we'll make sure that if that ever happens, we'll make sure that there's a backup. Like we'll do this instead.
Yeah.
It's not balance. You're choosing, I've got to do this, but you're not throwing away your family and stuff for it.
Right.
You know? You're not throwing away commitments. You accept that some things have to happen, and you maintain your life in order.
Yeah.
You know, but there is an order to it. Like you have to put God first. and then your family, and then you have to follow the order all the way down. And if you put that out of order, you get this idea that things are out of balance. Well, it's not out of balance, it's out of order.
It's important that we understand and realize that burnout is never God's fault.
No.
Like, God didn't mismanage something in the affairs of our life. God didn't get something out of order, or God didn't put more on us than He called or assigned for us to do, or anointed us to do, for that matter. So you need to understand, burnout's not God's fault. God didn't do something wrong. Anytime I've ever burned out, it's a result of self. Yeah. It's always been something I did incorrectly. And so the reasons, there's a lot of them. You know, you could have misaligned focus. You could have false expectations. You could just be going through failure and fatigue. You could have a particular stronghold or some sin in your life that you're just ignoring and neglecting and refusing to acknowledge with God and with yourself. You could be doing what you do for God for the wrong intentions. That's not a road that stays paved for very long. And so the reality is anybody can get burned out, and there are tons of reasons. But I think there is a huge myth surrounding the whole idea of balance. And I think it's important we understand it's a matter of order, not balance. And that is God first. And if I put Him first, like He said for me to do, and I allow everything else to trickle down from that order God established, I think He will honor such a system, and I think it'll keep me aligned in such a way where I can continue to go on without burning out, wearing the tread down on my spiritual tires, and just eventually having a blowout.
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. The next video, we're going to talk about how to remedy burnout, how to bounce back, how to rebound from it, and keep it from happening if it hasn't yet happened to you. Thanks so much for joining. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you in our next video.